Hello all my merry makers and welcome to another Merry Making Monday. I am Becca. Merry Making Mondays are all about tutorials. Either they've been suggested or requested or just thought of. Usually knit or crochet based. Lately I've been switching between two. Today we are going to be working on this pattern from Yarnspirations. So grab your knitting needles and your yarn and let's get started. Alright, so just as a reminder, this is the pattern number that we will be working from this week and probably for a couple of weeks. I will be including it in the description box, but in case the link does not work for whatever happens, I want you to have this in case you need to look it up that way. Alright, so for this particular tutorial, the white yarn is my MC or main color. The white yarn is just Red Heart Made with Love. I have got my size 10 ready to go because that's the size you're supposed to start with your larger size needles. So I think you all probably know this by now, but when I am making an elastic cast on, I like to do a long tail cast on. And I suggested this last time, but I didn't really show it to you. And that is, without wrapping, without counting, is a fairly easy way to gauge or to get the right amount of yarn. And that is to literally tie two ends of the yarn together. So you've got this center pole, and then this is the outer. I've taken the label off for ease. Now, some people do they don't care about how they join the yarn. I would like this to be a nice join, so I am doing a join that I don't remember the name of, but you literally tie two knots in the yarn, you pull it together, and I forgot my scissors, but eventually you trim that off. Alright, so the first set of instructions is to cast on 80 stitches with your larger needles. And in case any of y'all, if y'all aren't sick of it yet, this is how you do a long tail cast on. Now, if you've got your own elastic cast on that you love, go for it. But anyway, the yarn comes up over your index finger and around your thumb, and I grab it again with my middle finger. The needle comes down in between the two fingers, bringing the yarn with it. I go up through my thumb and I grab the yarn. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about this knot because I'm pretty good at weaving, and like I said, eventually I will trim that. And anyway, so now that I'm down here, go up through the yarn, cast it on. Now, you do not want to watch me cast on 80 stitches. That is boring. But I will again suggest to you what I suggested last time. Instead of trying to cast or count 80 stitches all at once, cast on 20, put a marker. And do that 4 times so that you know you have 80 stitches. I'll meet you at the join. Alright, so here I am. I've got 80 stitches on my circular needles. Now, you don't have to use circular needles. You can use double points. You can use 2 circulars, whatever strikes your fancy. I am going to say something that when you do join, make sure that your cast on edges are facing each other so that you know your work is not twisted. Now, some people struggle with this, so one thing that you can do is go ahead and knit a couple, or do the rib that I'm about to show for a couple of rows and then join. That will help you not twist it. Anyway, so you, using your main color yarn, whatever your main color yarn is, you are going to be doing what is called a twisted rib knit, and it calls for 1.5 inches. Now, if you are on gauge, that means you are going to be knitting somewhere between 10 to 12 rows. And if you are a person who has trouble reading patterns, I will show you what a twisted rib looks like. So, first things first, this is my beginning of round stitch marker. Now you're going to knit the first stitch, but through the back loop. So usually you come in through here, you're going to come in through here. And I think I've mentioned this before, I have a tendency to cast on tight. And Yarn Inspirations, knowing that some people do this, that's why I do cast on tight. Is why they're having you do this broken, what do they call it? Twisted rib pattern. Okay, because it will naturally loosen up your yarn. So, just like a regular knit, I'm going to grab the yarn, pull it through, let it drop off. Then, I'm going to purl the next stitch, but also through the back loop. So, this is the back loop, but I purl it like normal, and it comes off. And I am going to do that all the way around. So knit through the back loop, purl through the back loop, all the way around, and you're gonna, until you have at least 1.5 inches. Now if you like a wider brim, go for it. But I'm telling you what the pattern calls for, so that it should be anywhere between 10 to 12 if I'm on gauge. I'll meet you there. Oops, I almost forgot to mention. Now is the time, if you did what I did, to cut one of your ends. I am a center pole kind of gal, so I am going to give myself plenty of tail to weave in. I usually do about a hand width. Alright, now I can knit freely knowing which one's my working yarn and which one's my tail. Alright, so now we are at technically over 1.5 inches, and I am at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 complete rounds. By the way, I saw this hack on either Instagram or Facebook, and I want to share it with y'all. If you have interchangeable needles like me, they have a small hole which the key normally goes through. If you have a safety pin, you can put it through both of those holes and latch it, and then your work won't fall off. I just recently saw that. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you don't have interchangeable needles, and you've never gone you've never changed sizes in your work before. So, I'm going to show you how to do that, while showing you how to, while leading you through the first, So, the first set of instructions is how to set up the brioche stitch, which should look and sound familiar, because they're very similar to how I tell you how to set up the brioche stitch in my gauge video. Now, you have two choices. When I was doing the hats that I made for Mama G Gear and Rusty, I started with a rainbow yarn as my main color, and then use that to set up my brioche stitch. Or this is where you introduce your secondary colors and use that to set up your brioche stitch. Just remember, whatever you set up your brioche stitch with, that is going to be your knit rows, and whatever you don't set up your brioche stitch with, that is going to be your purl rows. Alright, so with that explained, let's imagine for a second that this is, I do have interchangeables. In fact, I hardly have any fixed needle sets except for circulars, except for my bamboos, which I only use with very slippery yarn. And I seem to have lost my beginning of round marker. There it is. I go ahead and slip that on to what is now my working needle, which is the smaller needle, which is in this case the size 8. And when they're telling you how to set up the brioche stitch, this is how they tell you to set it up. It says knit 1 yarn with yarn in front, purl, or slip 1 stitch purlwise with yarn in front, which, like I said, is exactly how. So purl, or sorry, knit the first stitch, put the yarn in front, slip the stitch as if to purl while the yarn is in front, it comes off, knit the next stitch, and you're going to continue, and you're like, oh yeah, this was in that gauge tutorial. Or you're like, what gauge tutorial? And in that case, I say, naughty, naughty, go back to the gauge tutorial and do gauge. Anyway, you're going to do this all the way around until all your stitches are now on your new needles. I'll meet you there. Alright, I'm nearing the end of my setup row, and one thing I want to comment about is if you are trying to follow this pattern to the letter, one of the things it says is that you should do 8 odd numbered rounds with each color. But it does not indicate whether this setup stitch counts or not. After doing the math, I am led to believe that this does indeed count as the first quote-unquote odd numbered row for this first color. So just keep that in mind. Now if you're using a self-striping, or sorry, a different color changing yarn like I did, or you're just doing a scrappy version where you're using whatever yarn you have, then you can completely ignore that. Alright, so now that we've gone all the way completely around and we're on our size 8, we are now ready to do the second setup round. So this, it is gonna look and sound familiar. You slip this first knit stitch, and then, oh, and you're going to be working with the white yarn, and you're going to be purling this time. Bring it front, purl the 2 stitches, and it actually says purl 2 together. So what this pattern is doing is trying to teach knitters who've never brioched before how to brioche, and that's how the pattern is written. So when it says purl 2 together, this is what it's talking about. These 2 strands that are together, that's what you're purling 2 together. Alright, so you're going to do this all the way around until you reach your beginning of round marker. I'll meet you there. Alright, we're at the end of our setup purl row. I am purling the last stitch, and we are ready to begin the actual pattern of this hat. I know it's a little bit involved, but trust me when I say if you've seen the hats, it is definitely worth it. So, the first round so you're going to knit with whatever color you used. I may have said this before. You're going to knit with whatever color you used to set up your brioche round. So the first step is knit 2 together. So again, it's not talking about knitting this knit stitch and this purl stitch together. It's literally talking about knitting these 2 stitches together. And if you've ever done purl before or brioche knitting before, that is very confusing. Heck, even if you haven't done brioche knitting before, that is very confusing. And I think that's one of the reasons why this pattern is a little confusing. How many times can you say the word confusing? Alright, and then it says yarn front, slip with yarn in front. And then we get to a small problem. It says brioche, well, it translates to brioche double decrease. Now, if you read the brioche double decrease like you have been reading the rest of the pattern, it says slip the next 2 stitches slipwise. So that would be this stitch and this stitch. And then it says to knit this stitch, which does not make any sense because this is a purl stitch. So, I'm going to tell you, this is the only instructions that are written like you are a brioche knitter. It took me a long time to figure this out, but you're not only slipping these 2 stitches, but this stitch as well, as if to knit. Okay? Then you knit this stitch, which is a knit stitch. Alright? And then you take all these stitches over here that you slipped, and you pass it over this stitch, and you have just done a central double decrease. Don't worry, I will show you that again. The next step of instructions are to bring your yarn front and slip the next stitch with the yarn in front. See how that makes sense? Then you're supposed to knit 2 together like you have been, have your yarn front and slip with the yarn in front, and you're supposed to do that 5 times. Now, I have found the best way to keep count is to just count my knit stitches and not the ones that I'm slipping. So that counts as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So, and now you start over with your repeat, which is at the beginning, which is knit these 2 together, bring the yarn front, slip that stitch with the yarn in front. Now, I'm going to show you only the right way, which is slip both these 2 well, if you're counting the loops, 3 stitches, as if to knit. Knit the next stitch, and then pass all 3 stitches back over that knit stitch. And then you do your repeat, then you bring your yarn to the front, slip the next stitch as if with the yarn in front, and then do 5 knit togethers followed by a slip. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you're going to do that repeat all the way around to your beginning of round stitch marker. I'll meet you there. Alright, I'm at the end of my first round. This is knit together number 5, which is another reason why I know that my interpretation of the instructions are correct. And now it is time to purl. Now, the purl rows are almost all the even rows are identical to the setup row, with a few exceptions, and the pattern does make note of them, and so will I. But for right now, it is normal, for lack of a better term. And just as a review, that means we slip the first stitch, bring the yarn round the needle, purl the 2 stitches together, and just keep on doing that all the way down. Put the yarn in front, slip the stitch, bring the yarn around the needle, and then purl the next stitch. And with that, I've shown you how to do the brim and the first few rounds of this brioche cable hat. I hope you will join me on the 7th. Oh, no. Stupid calendar does not want to work the way I want it to. On the 14th of August. Until then, my merry makers, make whatever makes you merry. Ciao.